Okay, we have a great number of attendees for this afternoon's webinar. Thank you so much for joining us today. We're going to talk about trends in cloud native, what's on the horizon for enterprise IT. My name is Karen Ianta, and I will be your moderator for today's webinar. Before we get started, I'd like to go over some general housekeeping items with you. You'll see the slide portrayed on your monitor at the moment. All attendees are in listen-only mode, and audio is provided via your computer or the phone settings that the phone number that was provided in the email that you received earlier today. Webinar is being recorded, and you will receive a link to the recording within about 24 hours. As we move through the webinar, please enter any questions that you may have in the chat panel, and we'll address them at the end of the webinar. So today I am very pleased to welcome and introduce you to our presenters. We have John White, Chief Innovation Officer with Expedient, and William Fellows, the Research Vice President and co-founder of 451 Research. For today's webinar, William's going to provide an overview of cloud-native trends in the marketplace and analyze how these approaches are changing the way enterprises consume IT infrastructure. And throughout the presentation, John will provide Expedient's perspective when relevant, and he'll also discuss 2 client case studies that illustrate the benefits of cloud-native approaches. Today's presentation should last about 45 minutes, and then we'll allow 10 to 15 minutes for questions and answers. So without further delay, let's get started, and welcome William, and take it away.
Thank you very much for that kind introduction. Referring back to the introductory slide, what's on the horizon, I think very much that is what is on the horizon: containers and lots of them. So here at 451 Research, we think that the market's now really entering a period of the era of consumption. And what I mean is that cloud consumption is overtaking cloud building as the primary driver of IT spending. And there's literally a cloud feast, if you like, of choices that are available to consumers. So I thought it would be useful just to see where we are, across the landscape now as we head towards this new horizon. So first of all, it's pretty clear that cloud is now very much the venue for everything else that's happening on top, and that provides really that's the infrastructure view. Cloud native, if you like, is providing the platform. It's providing all the fresh ingredients. It's providing containers and microservices and Kubernetes and service mesh and so on. And this is really the application view now, which is residing on the infrastructure. And while those are both technology pieces, they also contain the process piece as well, because as anyone doing cloud and cloud native must do DevOps, because as we know in the cloud, applications and infrastructure are the same. So the next thing that's required is the talent to put all this together. And what we know from our work with the 451 Alliance, which is our panel of enterprise IT end users, is that the access to talent is becoming more of a constraint these days than the access to capital. So that provides us with the organizational view. I think for this audience, what is also essential is the economic view, because it's our view that to all of this, the market value is accelerating here, and there really is a tremendous opportunity for pretty much everyone in this market. The underpinning is that enterprise workloads are on the move, and the replatforming to cloud and cloud native is now hitting the mainstream. So we asked that 451 Alliance I referred to, what is going to be your primary workload deployment environment from now through 2021, and 73% of respondents said that cloud would be their primary venue. And as you can see from this chart, that there's 2019 on the left, 2021 on the right, that in fact cloud in all of its forms is the beneficiary here, both public cloud increasing in use as primary deployment environment, and private cloud too. And I think the interesting subtext to this is that in the overall scheme, in the overall picture, the use of off-premise services as a venue rises from 48 to 65%. And going back to the alliance, they've now got all these things that are available in the market and so on. But we constantly ask the alliance, well, what is the organising principle here? And they come back time and time again and say that digital transformation remains the organising principle, and that cloud remains the most important transformational tool that they have for impacting their business operations, as we can see here, above some of these other things which are also gathering momentum. So as the replatforming to cloud and cloud native gathers momentum, obviously it's hitting the mainstream, so it's not just the early adopters any longer, but pretty much everyone is trying to figure out how they can make this move. And what that has left us in the situation at the moment is that everyone's at different points in that journey. And at the heart of the kind of hybrid and multi-cloud value proposition is that the on-premise that doesn't go away entirely, because some workloads aren't going to move to the cloud whatsoever, and many organizations, especially large enterprises, don't have the luxury of starting over with a clean sheet of paper, if you like, which is why we're seeing that there are a range of different migration motions in place at the moment, from the rehost and lift and shift, which is kind of infrastructure and ops centric, through refactoring and modernizing. And I would argue that this is becoming the major migration motion at the moment. So doing all of the things that you would need to do to try and offset the complexity, the disruption and cost of moving to cloud by establishing the sort of secure landing places for those applications, and doing refactoring before you make the move. And then of course there are new apps going into the cloud which are fully cloud native, and that requires a much more dev-centric approach to thinking about the use of cloud native constructs and cloud infrastructure. But that's definitely the horizon where we are, which we are heading towards at the moment. And I'll turn it over to John for a couple of minutes.
Yeah, so I think there's nobody that would really doubt or put any question in that cloud, and I'm using air quotes here, is the the driver for transformation. It's the driver for change, as well as then almost a change in venue to kind of make this work actually possible. And we spend a lot of time at Expedient kind of studying what that means, and what that actually needs to look like for our customers to be successful there. And so we did a lot of research, and we found that most companies, they have this grand vision that their world, their application needs to live inside of containers. They need to live inside of function as a service. They're reading the documentation online, whether it's a news journal, whether it's at a conference, but they're seeing all these examples of all these businesses that have changed their ways from cost structures, from agility, by moving to containers and function. And that's one place they want to go. They love the idea of elasticity, that rapid time to market. So you have resources at the touch of a finger ready to go. They understand the promise of utilizing something that's driven by APIs. So you start to use the infrastructure of the code. They love the concept of auto scaling. But when they look at their world, that vision looks really, really far away sometimes, because the reality in their side is that they're dealing with virtual machines still today as the primary factor for rolling out an application. Majority of their education is not really cloudy yet. It's focused on VMware. It's something that most engineers, whether you would focus on getting certifications in VMware or not, you have a lot of familiarity with the interfaces, how virtualization works. It's comfortable for you. This is the new physical server of 10, 15 years ago. The cost outcome and the performance outcome of building this virtualization platform yourself is something that we all kind of know. We've gone through, sometimes 2 or 3 of these cycles, through a standard capitalization budget process where you've bought the hardware, you know exactly what performance it's going to get. You kind of understand what you're actually going to get out of those end resources. Most businesses really need to have a high SLA uptime, typically around 100%. And for most people, there's still a real reason for them to actually run their cloud on their premises. Maybe they have a data center that's not fully depreciated. Maybe they are struggling with audits or security and compliance that really they just can't wrap their head around running it into a third-party data center or a third-party cloud. And there still needs to be some greater control in the meantime. And so we look at that vision of where they want to go. We look at that reality, and we kind of boil down the challenges really into a few main categories that people can't go to that vision point because that application replatforming is extremely expensive in most cases. We've heard various numbers over the years, but a replatform of an application, from what I've got from guidelines from the people in the field, is about $1 million an application. That's a lot of money to spend on an application where maybe that doesn't even generate you that much money a year. The fluctuating costs and performances that are out there, that scares people. They're not sure if they're going to deal with cloud sprawl or noisy neighbor. The skill gap thing is a major challenge for most enterprises, where they need to get people on board of cloud native applications. But right now, that's 2 or 3 people out of 100 people. So they have a lot more, training to do to get people, comfortable there. The latency side of things is always, on everybody's mind. Am I going to lose control? Am I going to give my users a poor experience when they go outside of my 4 walls? I don't know. And a lot of people, they view the vision going towards the hyperscalers. And when they look at that, they see, those SLAs, the 99.5 or the 99%, that's not really going to be good for my customers because I'm giving them 100% SLA. So how can my end provider only provide me 99%? We could be in a lot of business trouble there if we go that way. And then the compliance and audits, it's something, again, that continues to challenge people to try to figure out how to wrap their heads around it. And even train the auditors to understand what this new world and new cloud could look like in the future and how they should be actually testing it instead of the old ways they were doing it now. So with all those challenges, being said there, and knowing that the vision is probably on the far side of this bridge and the reality is kind of in the near term, we knew we needed to kind of focus in and tune in a platform that kind of sat in the middle. So if you go back to the old nursery tale where you have a bed too hard, a bed too soft, we wanted to make the bed just right, which is really where we focused on developing Enterprise Cloud. So next slide one. So what we did with Enterprise Cloud is create a platform that is completely hardware resilient. So we all know when we move into the hyperscalers, you have to actually create application resiliency there. The whole pets versus cattle. You want to run pets in our world, that's where you're doing it today, but you want to build cattle for the future. That's a lot of what Enterprise Cloud provides you, but making sure that the hardware is resilient underneath. A very familiar environment, so everything's built on VMware. The licensing is easy and the pricing is easy to do. It's per gig, so you don't have to worry about structuring all your VMs and t-shirt sizes. You pay for the resource pools. a ton of security built in by default, ties into your own Active Directory or SAML authentication you might have, two-factor authentication, encryption at rest, micro-segmentation via VMware NSX. All those things were kind of built in the beginning. We provide 100% SLA on it. We have a lot of different diverse locations. We run 11 data centers of our own. We also will host Enterprise Cloud in partner data centers, and something that is catching on in the industry that we've been doing for a few years now is hosting at the customer's premises. So if you have that data center that hasn't been fully depreciated, we can actually build Enterprise Cloud in your data center. Or if you have data gravity that you're producing just so much data, it'd be too expensive to move it out to a public place, that's something that we can provide. And not only does this environment in Enterprise Cloud support virtual machines, but it also handles the future of microservices. So we utilize VMware's Cloud Service Extension or Container Service Extension project, as well as Rancher. So you can then manage Kubernetes clusters, start to build microservices, and do those right beside your virtual machines, which are really right where you typically have your critical data. And last but not least, then we provide a full API environment. So you can do infrastructure as code, start playing with Terraform right away. That's all done via vCloud Director. So, as William talked about, the cloud is definitely the place where you're going. It's the impact factor. But if you're concerned about kind of, hey, I got all these virtual machines. What am I supposed to do with those? How am I going to, re-platform these? It's too expensive. We focused on creating a product that kind of sits in the middle, that gives you a lily pad to kind of walk you across all those steps to that future enterprise cloud. And, as William kind of goes through and kind of lays out the rest of the data that he has in his studies, we'll give you a few examples of our customers that have taken advantage of running virtual machines as well as then cloud native applications inside of this platform. Back to you, William.
Thanks, John. And I can see how your platform makes an excellent bridge from the old world to the new for helping customers along that journey. One of the things that we do at 451 is to operate a cloud price index. So we provide a range of pricing indicators to help end user organizations understand the relative cost of doing things in different kind of environments. And as part of that, what we do is to pull via APIs from all of the major hyperscaler websites, and as of just last week, it turns out that there are at the moment 1.5 million things that you can buy from AWS, Microsoft, Google, IBM, and Alibaba in aggregate. Now, how anyone is supposed to understand which of those are can be used in the best combination is pretty hard. And the menu expansion means that overindulgence now and runaway costs are becoming a real fear, which is why at the moment optimization tools are at a premium to help enterprises understand what the options are, selecting from menus, or even finding the best daily deals. So it's all very well having all this available, but you need to be sure to optimize the use given the complexity. And indeed, as the replatforming to cloud accelerates, I think the key question is then which applications and workloads in what sequencing are going into which venues over which time period. That's really where the service providers are trying to organize themselves to be able to catch, if you like, those apps and workloads as they land. From the end user point of view, as the worlds of managed services and cloud and hosting, converge, their options are growing exponentially. We've been using the term best execution venue now for more than a decade to understand the strategies that will enable users to determine which services are right for their needs. And it really centers on the notion that for every class of IT business need, there's an environment which will best balance, whatever parameters the user wants: performance, cost, security, and so on. And the IT organization should be able to select that environment as part of the general practice of IT. However, I think it's still pretty clear that we're in an industrialized sort of factory place right now where there are still lots of machines that amplify human labor, and it's certainly more efficient and repeatable than it has been, but all these things are still full of people nonetheless. But I think where we are heading, and pretty quickly, the fact that automation is reaching its limit in terms of scripts, workflows, and processes in DevOps, the next step is to make those processes subject to inspection and automation that effectively thinks for itself. So I'm talking here about the use of machine learning and other techniques here, because I think we're within sight of applications being able to select and maintain the IT environment they require on their own, and indeed when code can write, or perhaps more importantly, rewrite itself to meet whatever the conditions are. And as a result, what's happening is that cloud management platforms now are rotating to more dev-centric approaches as the rise in use of cloud-native constructs accelerates. But that comes with obvious caveats as well, because the more self-service, self-driving, autonomous, the sort of ephemeral nature of those resources and all the different sort of programming environments, I think will mean that there have to be some additional kind of, if you like, health and safety measures. And so our counsel is to work with vendors who can provide a kind of safety first approach for you in terms of the environment that you're going to be operating in there. Indeed, we think that the run anywhere mentality of cloud native applications and workloads literally will need to be anywhere, at any time, any place, requires the infrastructure to become more invisible. So first of all, technology consumers expect to access and assemble and pay for services in a pretty simple and automated way without requiring any specific knowledge of the underlying infrastructure. But moreover, the greater the requirement to be concerned with configuring infrastructure, the less productive your expensive developers are going to be. So invisible infrastructure is instantly available and operates and scales sort of regardless of specific requirements, and is billed and metered in the manner that the customer prescribes. It just works. Obviously, and importantly, it's also not out of reach for those that need to directly access it. So turning to cloud native, so the industry likes to talk about how the fact that 90% of existing apps don't use containers and 95% of new apps will use containers. So 451 research can be a little more scientific than that, and we can see from this chart that within 2 years, nearly 80% of folks are going to be deploying containers, 70% Kubernetes, and more than a quarter serverless or functions as a service. So that's the sort of progress of, or planned adoption of cloud native technologies. And what we've done at 451 is to describe this kind of spectrum of abstraction, if you like. And this gives you the greater level of abstraction moving to the right. And it also it shows how different kinds of infrastructure, modalities, and levels of abstraction can be operated, across this landscape. So just to summarize on the technology pieces themselves, obviously microservices, which are the kind of destination for all of that cloud native activity. That's how apps are going to be constructed and communicate and so on. That's really the most important cloud native technology. So our alliance tells us, followed by containers and serverless and Kubernetes. But clearly all of these are, have a role in successful deployments here. These three at the bottom are, now coming on quite strongly in terms of interest and adoption. So at least some cloud native software is being developed internally, although clearly there's an opportunity for it to be consumed in many different ways at the moment. And it's also being designed to run on any cloud, to run on specific public clouds, and on any public clouds. All of those sort of deployment motions are being used by enterprises at this time. I'll hand back to John, who can provide some proof points to this. John.
Yeah, so what we're seeing in the field too, to kind of go along with William and his research groups as far as timeline goes, is lining up pretty nicely. We have a lot of clients now that are getting ready to explore cloud native, or they are already running applications on it, so we're helping them host those. And one of the case studies we're going to talk about today is a company called Homes.com. Pretty interesting business. They host they have a pretty big website where they receive millions of users every month, and they actually host websites or houses on there for sale, for rent. And so you have pictures of all these houses that are actually running inside of their platform. And they do that as well as then serve as backends for a lot of really big real estate companies to actually provide their access into kind of the multi-list, as well as then just where the kind of market places for homes right now. And when they came to us, they had a few different challenges. They were utilizing AWS, they were using Azure, they were starting to build out microservices. However, they've been in business since 1993, so they had a ton of legacy technical debt there, where they're running virtual machines to do all kinds of different mini apps inside of their main big app, Homes.com. So they had different programming languages, different systems that are built that all are needed to interact with each other. They were having big issues on cloud sprawl, so the money they were spending was starting to get a little bit out of control. They were really, at the end of the day, looking for a platform that was able to host virtual machines, host cloud native, run across multiple sites, as well as then handle the amount of content that they store. So we have about 2.6 billion images being stored for Homes.com right now, and that's growing at about a 30% rate. So it's something where, the scale of that many elements, of that many objects, is pretty crazy to think about. So they needed a really robust platform. And long story short there, the same enterprise cloud that I just told you about, that kind of sits in the middle between kind of where you're going in the future and where you're at today, we were able to utilize enterprise cloud to help them actually simplify their world, reduce significant OpEx, about 20% over a 3-year TCO, and that allows them to kind of spend that money somewhere else. They're a growing company. They're always evolving. It's a pretty cutthroat marketplace that's out there. There's a lot of other competition. They were able to spend their money on things that are going to help them strategically in the business instead of just the IT maintenance. And we were able to give them a really accelerated platform for them to have their developers, instead of going and doing shadow IT, but actually put them into an IT environment that can easily be maintained, audited, make sure security is set there, and allows them to do cloud native applications built on Kubernetes, as well as then handle the virtual machine workloads. So they were able to get a lot of time back in their day, as well as a few bucks to put back in their pocket and invest in their business in a different way, just by choosing the right cloud for the right operational needs that they were looking for.
Thanks, John. Interesting. So the other sort of super important piece here, apart from only the technology, is of course the process, in order to ensure that there's going to be a successful delivery, successful implementation. And the DevOps mentality is rising pretty fast in terms of its use to deliver the benefits of agility and speed and control and faster releases and so on. As you can see here, when we've asked how DevOps is benefiting the organizations in our enterprise alliance. Moreover, it's the technologies are specifically, cloud native technologies are specifically supporting and driving that momentum, especially because the ephemeral nature of these things, the modularity of them, it allows organizations to be able to undertake continuous experimentation to learn quickly, for example, what works and what doesn't, without burning through, lots of money and human capital. So we can see here that public cloud, containers, container management, and serverless, all of these things are important in, moving DevOps forwards inside these organizations. So just to kind of double click on where we are with them, I think that in general, what we're finding is that cloud native approaches can importantly deliver on this sort of trifecta of better, faster, and cheaper. That's really where these transformations are going. And the replatforming, it's a bit like the replatforming to the web and the internet that happened in the 1990s and so on. It's going to take a few years for this to work through as well, but certainly the container is going to be the atomic unit for that. I've talked a little bit about the run anywhere mentality, especially with regard to invisible infrastructure, but this also means that organizations are able to, break down the kind of the lock-in to any particular vendor. They're able to, to do things on a much wider geographic basis. They're able to do things, when they feel like they are in control. Having said that, I think there's still a bit of an issue with cloud native with regard to security. IT ops has always been regarded as secure, dev not so much. Bring them together. Well, if you can download containers from the internet, doesn't it compromise, or could compromise security? So I think that means there's still an awful lot of opportunity for innovation in this space to really nail that down. And of course, every organization now wants to be delivering digital services. These are principally software activities. Companies need to raise their software IQ to deliver that. And therefore, the developer enablement piece, I think, is a key part of having a successful cloud native strategy at an organization. I don't know whether anyone out there has seen a killer app for cloud native. I don't think we have yet. And it's a bit like asking, well, what's the killer app for 5G? And at the moment, that looks like being, speed and agility. But the way the telco industry is now coming to terms with the whole SD-WAN and overhauling service delivery with cloud native constructs, maybe even 5G becomes the killer app for cloud native. Who knows? The key point though is that you can put all of these things together to come up with your meal. They're composable and they're software defined. Having said that, when we actually ask the alliance partners, well, to what extent is your software, cloud native software, portable? At the moment, only about a quarter are very confident that it's portable, which I think speaks, fundamentally about still the early stage and immaturity of the market. Again, plenty of opportunity for innovation there. So turning to the access to talent, what we know is that there's a pretty big skill shortage across organizations who are seeking to do this. And really that's become the new organizational roadblock. We can see here that various kinds of cloud expertise, cloud native, cloud platform, integration, orchestration, this is really starting to impact the ability of organizations to move forwards. But I think this also points to the fact that it's a tremendous opportunity for service providers like Expedient and others who can help to upskill customers and bring their expertise to bear here, because end users are looking to work with trusted partners who not only host their solutions but also can help them manage them using the kind of the shared process knowledge that they have across their customer bases. So increasingly important that app devs are now getting a say in what apps are developed and where they're deployed. We can see in the photo that in the image that was traditionally there was the grown-ups table and the kids table, if you like, and now those kind of worlds are coming together, and 50% of organizations have integrated app dev into IT, but clearly that means 50% still haven't done that. But we think that is increasingly going to be necessary to support successful strategies. And perhaps that's some experience that John's had with some of the Expedient customers as well.
Yeah, this next one I'm going to talk about, it's definitely been an evolution to getting the adult table and the kids table to come sit together inside of the same table. I love that analogy. I love that picture. This company here I'll talk about is a healthcare related company. They do CRM for really big healthcare companies themselves. And so they have to deal with a ton of compliance, security, that type of thing. And they've been a customer of ours for a long time now. And they've been mainly utilizing virtual machines to run their application. They too saw that, hey, we need to make a little bit of a change. We need to make sure that we can take advantage of some of these new economical models that are coming out now with containers and function as a service. And we need to start utilizing microservices to increase scalability, because we have no idea how many users we're going to end up supporting here in the next few years, because sales just keeps knocking it out of the park. So they created a DevOps team, and this DevOps team wanted to start to utilize microservices, but they still had to interact with the virtual machines. Virtual machines are still where a majority of their data lives. They have really, really heavy HIPAA compliance, data sovereignty rules, and very strict SLAs to their customers. They actually have SLAs even on specific functions of their application that they have to perform a certain way to then make sure that they're meeting that compliance. They tried running some of these applications in a hyperscale cloud, but the latency and performance demands that they were looking for really weren't being met there. In comes Enterprise Cloud. It came out of development last year. We launched this in January. We started working with them to see with this platform how it would look if we ran the containers and the VMs inside of the same resource pool. That did solve a lot of latency and performance issues, so they were extremely satisfied with that. And then we were able to create some pretty cool services to kind of help them along the way in their journey. They already are super educated on the space, but they needed help maybe productionizing a few of it. So we were able to create some pretty cool services that are all in beta right now, with Rancher as a service and Elastic as a service. And we're even working with some persistent storage companies to kind of help meet their needs there. So like you mentioned, the knowledge and the kind of the tribal knowledge just isn't there yet. People are still continuing to learn. And that is exactly where Expedient is planning to step in to help provide some guidance along the way. If you look at the Cloud Native Cloud Foundation page, there's hundreds and hundreds of vendors that are out there to provide all these different functions that you need to make cloud native applications. We're here to try to help make sense of that, as well as then provide you a guided path to give you some ideas to kind of start this whole new journey. Because just saying that you're into DevOps or just saying that you're focused on cloud native is only the first part of the battle. Actually doing something is the bigger part, and that's a little bit harder to get started on.
I'm glad you mentioned that, John, because I'm going to talk about the landscape in just in a little bit. But one of the questions that I'm often asked, okay, there's all these things in the market, but at the end of the day, who's going to care? Aren't the hyperscalers simply going to eat the world? And, my answer is sort of as follows. At a high level, we think the aggregated market is big enough for everyone to be able to take something from it. Everyone can eat here. But let's just drill down a quick second. So in our in 451's market monitor service for cloud computing, we track 275 IaaS vendors, and once we strip out the everything but the pure compute and storage, what we're left with is a market that's worth about $24 billion this year. And interesting, if you add up the revenue for 274 of those vendors, it only just exceeds that of Amazon. But bear that 24 billion in mind. And when we turn to the bigger aggregated market for cloud hosting and managed services, we can see that the 2019 forecast is about $143 billion. So if we back out the 24 from there, we can see that this is still a market that is 4 or 5 times bigger than just the pure IaaS market, and they're all growing. This is not a zero-sum game. There is room for many players in here. Indeed, one of the interesting points of momentum at the moment is cloud delivered and managed on-premise, which is sort of proving to be a rising tide, especially for longer tail vendors, which are now coming to market with offerings that are becoming more cloud-like. I mean, there are still many apps, as I said, that aren't going to move to cloud. The difficulty I think they have is escaping from the world of selling boxes and IT outsourcing and leasing and financial engineering and so on. There's still a lot of smoke and mirrors, and pricing is going up and down. But for some, I think this could be a real force multiplier for their businesses. But ultimately, it's not a battle between on-premise and off-premise. It's about how you want to consume the infrastructure, machines, and how you want to pay for it. And in a world that's rotating towards subscription, consumption-based, that obviously kind of favors the hyperscalers at the moment. And it's really all about who can deliver against that appetite, and whether other vendors can rotate their own businesses to remain relevant. When we asked our alliance, though, what is their appetite for this? Actually, there are more who say that they want to use a mix of CapEx and OpEx than there are for either one or the other, which suggests that suppliers which can have a flexible approach are likely to be more successful in the market. So where are we with things? So ultimately, enterprises can go faster with cloud, and I think be more efficient with microservices. And the emergence of all of these cloud containers and microservices promises to really dramatically simplify the deployment of applications. Run anywhere, you can do it yourself, and so on. But I think with the breadth of cloud goods and services available in the market, the key to success is actually going to be working with partners who can help you find the right combinations of them, and then operationalizing them to deliver the benefits, as advertised by the suppliers, if you like, whether that's speed, scale, agility, and so on. So being digital, digital transformation, as I said, remains the organizing principle. And being digital, what does that really require? Well, it requires continuous delivery pipelines, and in turn, those need APIs to infrastructure, which is dynamically configurable, and that ultimately is cloud. So that's the kind of hardwired nature of transformation. Do I think the hyperscalers are going to eat the world? No. I think their desire to partner with managed service providers and others is largely driven by, well, they need to get the work done. They don't want that sort of margin-thin, labor-intensive business. And hyperscalers are not in business to put together a sort of jumble of different services across multiple venues and then manage and optimize them. Again, that's what MSPs do for a living. So I think there's going to be a big role for those firms that can manage the complexity and identify the right environments in which to run workloads. ultimately, a cloud may even disappear as a separate IT category. And I say that because just having attended the recent KubeCon and CNCF meetings over the last couple of years, it's become clear to me when you go into these events, both the conference and exhibition, that cloud is not really evident. In other words, it's just assumed that cloud is, is the underpinning for all of this stuff. So to that end, 451 has taken the CNCF landscape, which has got those, actually, I was going to say hundreds, but actually thousands of, things on it, and boiled it down into 10 sectors of around 700 companies. And these are based on the inbound requests that we've had from customers seeking guidance about, the emergence of these markets, what things should they be concerned with, what's going on, and so on. So we're providing them with competitive ranking and rating of companies in these sectors via our Cloud Native Center of Excellence, which is a sort of a virtual channel which provides customers with a direct path to the experts in their fields. So if you want more information, you can ping me afterwards. But in the meantime, I'll hand it back to John.
Yeah, thanks, William. Great content today. And if you're looking for more information on the Expedient side of things, feel free to check out our website. You can actually go and get a test drive of Enterprise Cloud yourself. We think we've created a great stepping stone to kind of complete everybody's cloud journey for the future. We understand the impact of the business today, but we understand the impact of the business tomorrow. We like to think of the Expedient Enterprise Cloud as actually tomorrow's cloud today. So with that, I want to make sure we have plenty of time to start the Q&A. So if you have questions for myself and William, let's start getting those in the chat or inside of the Q&A box, and we'll hand it back over to you, Karen.
Thanks, John. Thank you, William. Great presentation today, and appreciate your time on this really great subject. And William, I have to say, I'm glad we had this after lunch, because all your references to food could have been really challenging.
Thank you.
So as John mentioned, we are moving into the question and answer portion of the webinar. So please get your questions in. And as a reminder, for more information about Expedient, please visit our website, expedient.com, and the same for 451 Research. Visit their website as well. Okay, so we have a couple questions coming in. The first one, John, it looks like it's for you. It's referencing Expedient Enterprise Cloud. What are the main benefits of running containerized workloads on Expedient Enterprise Cloud versus other cloud platforms?
All right, good question. One of the biggest things that we found is the actual performance of it. So we actually did a third-party test with company called Cloud Spectator. You can actually find it on our website. And we did the specific performance test that I'm talking about is focused on the network. And we actually looked to see what the performance would be if we had two VMs running on the same host in our world, as well as then two separate hosts. And the performance we were able to get when they were running side by side was significant. It was in the order of about 16 to 30 gigabits per second as somewhat of a variable. And that, when we were seeing it in AWS and Azure, was really into a few gigabits per second. So when you need to create microservices that still need to talk to the actual systems of record, the databases, whatever, you got to make sure you understand if you have the bandwidth or if there's going to be too much latency to interact with them. For the most part, in hyperscalers, those are usually two separate groups. And so you will have bandwidth challenges in hyperscale, and then latency challenges over there, where inside Enterprise Cloud, you won't have any issues there.
Okay, thanks, John. We have another question, and it looks like it's for you again, John. Does EEC support, and I hope I'm saying this correctly, Ansible, A-N-S-I-B-L-E? Okay.
Yeah, it's something that we actually utilize internally for a lot of our automation. It is something that can interact with Enterprise Cloud as well. And if you actually look at, we have a knowledge-based kb.expedient.cloud. I think we actually have examples up there of how you can interact with it via command line interface, via Terraform, via Ansible.
Okay, great. Thanks. Next question. How does a traditional enterprise customer begin the migration process from monolithic non-cloud native application to a fully cloud native solution? And second question, second part, how do they improve their internal knowledge base to make it possible?
Yeah, William, do you want to give kind of your view of it, and I can give you my view from some of the things that I've worked on?
Yeah, I guess there are plenty of vendors. There are plenty of offerings now which can help users undertake all of the sort of pre-flight stuff. So all the cloud readiness pieces to assess which applications and workloads over what period of time might be suitable for running in those different environments, and which it might be more sensible to either purchase as a software as a service, or just redevelop net new. I don't think there's any single right approach here, and I think organizations which have a mix of approaches are likely to be more successful than just doing a whole kind of cloud first thing and trying to dump everything onto cloud. And I think making sure that you take care of all those again, those sort of pre-flight, pre-boarding steps are super important in making sure that you achieve the business outcome that you really want, rather than creating another hairball, both from a technology and an operating point of view.
Yeah, and from our side, I think the big thing that we've seen really help people go from a monolith into cloud native is a champion to actually switch the company culture. People that say they want to do something, but don't actually put the new, really kind of rules of how you operate in place, it really never gets done. So having and starting, some sort of DevOps team, moving people towards more jack of all trades instead of breaking down the silos, starting to, build almost a site reliability based background. I mean, that all those things kind of help you move there. Developers, most likely, they want to move to a microservices architecture because that's how they can iterate faster. It's how they can kind of scale their application, but they need the rest of the company to kind of be on board. There's a few good books out there right now. One that I just read was a book called Accelerate. I don't know if you've ever read that, William. Gene Kim is one of the authors there. He wrote the Phoenix Project. Awesome book. Gives you a lot of different ideas, shows you how ING actually was able to move into this environment. You'll notice there's a ton of just people and process that needs to be changed to kind of make everybody push towards this new cloud native world that they want to live in.
So that's a good point, John, actually. And actually, the more successful projects that we have looked at are typically those that have been driven with a top-down mandate for change in terms of that transformation piece. The other thing is the switching mentality to treating IT as a production system, as a system for innovation, instead of just only a support system. And so, using DevOps to sort of redesign those processes and improve the sort of IT literacy of staff, and really pursue a bunch of tactical improvements as the basics for the strategic change that's required.
Okay, great. Thank you both. This next question is for John. John, I see Expedient completed a 100 gigabit backbone. Is this just internal to a single Expedient data center, between Expedient data centers, or from Expedient to the internet?
right. Yeah, and I think I can tie this into another question I see focused on Azure and AWS. So yes, Expedient just completed a 100 gigabit backbone. This interlinks all of our data centers across the United States, as well as it interconnects us into major peering points throughout the United States as well. So we can ride that private backbone to the public internet, as well as into hyperscalers. So we've been doing cross connects into AWS, Azure, Google, as well as then even other big data repositories, companies like Facebook and Twitter. All of those things can actually be cross connect away once you're on the Expedient network. And that Expedient network touches the virtual environments, so the cloud environments, as well as then our co-location environments. And we can really interconnect anywhere all over the United States and really into the world.
Good. Thank you, John. William, this next question looks like it's for you. How far off do you think the ability for the cloud to be, in quote unquote, invisible, and developers to not having to worry about the infrastructure, performance, and security their apps run on?
So, well, as my sort of closing remarks indicated, when you walk through an exhibition, conference, whatever, or meeting room where where all the sort of cloud native stuff is going on, increasingly you'll find that those folks are not concerned with specifically the infrastructure. It's just assumed that is running. But don't get me wrong, I don't think that it's going to be completely invisible, for some time. But let's say I expect that to really pick up through 2020, because I think it's going to become clear that the benefits for abstracting that infrastructure away are going to be found in better customer experiences and better developer productivity.
Yeah, I'd say my kind of take on it is I think some of it's there, but I don't think anything ever goes invisible. I mean, the developers are not going to care so much about the infrastructure, performance, security. Well, security, they're going to have to build it into the code that they're creating and think about it now. So another trend you'll see is the SecOps, where your developers are trying to, yes, write code that becomes easy to operate, but you also need to worry about the security side of it. But there always is going to be, some people worried about the performance of the infrastructure. I think a lot of the monitoring tools that are becoming available, one being Elastic, to kind of see and have vision from the infrastructure all the way into the application, they're going to be able to help and make it invisible, because it's not going to be the developers really going to work on it. It's going to be some sort of cloud architect, which I think is going to be a new role that we're going to start to see develop and become mainstream, that kind of helps orchestrate and is basically the person behind the puppet, kind of controlling all the strings to make sure that it works perfectly, and the developer kind of can get out of worried about that.
Thank you both. I think we have time for one more question. Oh, I'm sorry. Give me 1 second here. Does Expedient's legacy cloud platform offer support for microservices, containers, and Kubernetes? John, that looks like it's yours.
The legacy platform, I mean, it can. Some of the challenges there are the lack of front-end API. It's something that we're actively working on. So if you're an existing customer, we can definitely have a conversation with your solution architect and your salesperson. And if it's something that you're looking to start leveraging, we can look at making sure that we have the right solution underneath you to support your needs.
Okay, great. I'm going to squeeze in one more question, John. You mentioned that Expedient does per gigabyte pricing rather than, quote, t-shirt sizing instances, quote. How does this work when it comes to sizing nodes for a Kubernetes cluster? Follow-up. Does the cluster automatically size the nodes depending on Kubernetes pod resource requests, or is the node sizing declared up front and changed explicitly as needs change?
Yeah, so it's the latter part of the question. So when we're designing with Kubernetes, we've found so far that your mileage is going to vary depending on what the actual microservices are doing inside of the Kubernetes environment. We've started right now somewhat staying consistent in inside of a t-shirt size for just the Kubernetes VMs, the master and the minions. And that's something that per customer, it's going to be a variable. So you'll set it up in the beginning. You know, some people are doing 4 CPUs, 32 gig of RAM, somewhere around there. And if you need to change that, we can change it. But also, you know, since Kubernetes is really meant to be a scale out architecture, we'll want to look at that first and then kind of make sure that we have the kind of perfect fit to make it work. But what we've seen is every customer is a little bit different. Every workload is a little bit different. And so we'll kind of work with you on figuring out what makes sense the best there. But the key point to kind of my statement that I said in the presentation is underneath still, you're only paying for the per gigabyte that you're actually consuming. So you could set all of your Kubernetes nodes to 32 gig of RAM. If they're only consuming, 12 gig of RAM, that's what you're going to be paying for is the 12 gig of RAM and not the 32 or 64 that you have it set to. So we're pulling all those resources in together in each of the sites, and then from there you're provisioning VMs or Kubernetes VMs on top of it to kind of make your application go.
Okay, great. Thank you. Well, folks, we are at the top of the hour. This does wrap up our webinar today. I want to thank John White again and William Fellows for their time this afternoon. And as we mentioned earlier, the links to the webinar and today's presentation will be emailed after the event or after the conclusion today, most likely tomorrow. Thank you again for attending and enjoy the rest of your day.